In the dusty town of Red Rock, where the blazing sun scorched the dirt roads and the wind carried the smell of gunpowder, sweat, and cheap whiskey, everyone knew the name Vincent Marshall. He was the man who ruled those lands, a powerful landowner who had crossed the ocean many years earlier to build an empire among railroad tracks, silver mines, and endless stretches of prairie. His estate, known as Fortune Ranch, rose in the middle of the desert like an impenetrable fortress. Those who worked there understood that a single careless word could cost them their job, their freedom, or even their life. Vincent Marshall was feared, respected, and above all obeyed without question. But there was someone inside the estate who inspired even greater fear. His fiancée Victoria Cross. Victoria had arrived in Red Rock only a year earlier. She was always wrapped in imported silks, decorated with expensive jewelry, and surrounded by the powerful scent of French perfume. Her face often displayed an elegant smile, but behind it hid a personality as cold and sharp as the blade of a knife. People said that before becoming engaged to Vincent, she had left behind a long trail of dismissed maids, ruined merchants, and rivals forced into silence. No one dared to contradict her, not even the armed men who guarded Fortune Ranch day and night. Victoria moved through the corridors of the mansion as though she were already a queen. Whenever she approached, the workers lowered their eyes, terrified that the slightest mistake might awaken her anger. In the middle of that world ruled by fear and silence worked Rose Walker, a young maid who had come to Fortune Ranch while fleeing the crushing poverty of her hometown. Rose had never known a life that did not involve exhausting labor. She scrubbed the marble floors, washed the owner's delicate clothes, and served meals during meetings in which men discussed business deals, territories, and agreements she could never fully understand. But Rose possessed something Victoria could not tolerate: dignity. Rose lowered her head out of courtesy, never out of fear. She could remain silent when necessary, but she would never allow anyone to destroy her self-respect. That difference, although almost invisible to everyone else, awakened a fury in Victoria that grew stronger with each passing day. Vincent, for his part, barely noticed Rose during her first weeks at the estate. He had grown accustomed to thinking of servants as invisible figures, silent extensions of the mansion who appeared only when they were needed. However, little by little, he began to notice the young woman's small acts of kindness. He saw her gently caring for injured horses in the stables. He watched her comfort the poor children who came to the kitchen's back door in search of leftovers. He also heard her singing softly while hanging white sheets beneath the burning sun, as though all the cruelty in the world had been unable to stain her soul. There was something in Rose that Vincent had not encountered in many years. True kindness. Kindness without calculation, hidden intentions, or disguised ambition. The tension between Victoria and Rose finally exploded during a hot summer evening. Vincent had organized a grand celebration to honor a new commercial agreement with several wealthy investors from the north. Fortune Ranch was filled with men wearing elegant suits, women covered in jewelry, and businessmen interested in the region's mines and railroad lines. The sound of violins drifted through the warm night air. Wine flowed as though the abundance would never end, while the servants hurried from one table to another. Rose had been assigned to serve the main table, where Victoria sat as though she were already the absolute owner of the estate and every person living on it. That was when the incident occurred. An incident that would change all their lives. A village boy named Tommy Reed, who often wandered near the kitchen looking for something to eat, managed to slip among the guests. Fascinated by the lights, music, and beautiful decorations, he carefully approached the dessert table. Tommy had no intention of stealing anything. He only wanted to look. But Victoria saw him. The moment she noticed the poorly dressed child standing beside the desserts, her expression hardened. To her, his presence was an unbearable insult, a stain of poverty in the middle of her perfect celebration. Without asking a single question, Victoria grabbed Tommy by the arm with such force that the child immediately cried out in pain. In front of dozens of guests, she dragged him away from the table, shoved him to the ground, and called him a filthy street rat. Then she ordered the guards to throw him off the property, even if they had to beat him to make him leave. Rose had been watching from the kitchen entrance, holding a tray filled with crystal glasses. When she heard the child crying, she felt something break inside her. For months she had endured insults, humiliation, and threats. She had remained silent so she could keep her job and send a little money to her struggling family. But she could not stand still while a grown woman poured her cruelty onto a defenseless child. Rose placed the tray on the nearest table. The sudden clatter of the glasses attracted the attention of several guests, but she did not stop. She walked directly across the courtyard toward Victoria. The conversation slowly faded as the guests noticed the determination in her steps. No one dared approach Vincent Marshall's fiancée in such a manner, especially not a simple maid. Rose stopped in front of Victoria and looked down at little Tommy, who was still crying on the ground. "Do not touch him again," she said in a clear, steady voice. Victoria stared at her in disbelief. "What did you just say to me?" "I said, do not touch that child again." The guests froze. Victoria stepped toward Rose and raised her hand, preparing to slap her. She never got the chance. Before Victoria could react, Rose clenched her fist and released all the strength that had been building inside her through months of silence, humiliation, and injustice. Her fist struck Victoria directly across the face. The sound echoed through the courtyard like a gunshot. Victoria fell backward, tripping over her own silk dress. A thin stream of blood appeared on her lower lip. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the violinist stopped playing. Everyone looked first at Victoria, lying on the ground with an expression of shock and humiliation. Then their eyes turned toward Rose, who was breathing heavily but showed no sign of regret. Vincent had been speaking with several investors on the other side of the courtyard when he heard the disturbance. He pushed his way through the crowd and reached the center of the scene. What he saw left him motionless. His fiancée was lying on the ground, humiliated in front of all his guests. Rose stood before her with her hands clenched, while little Tommy hid behind the maid's skirt, still sobbing. For the first time in many years, the most powerful man in the region did not know how to react. His instincts told him that such defiance had to be punished. He was expected to defend his fiancée's honor in front of his business partners and prove that no one could challenge the authority of the Marshall family. Yet something in Rose's eyes stopped him. There was no arrogance in her expression. There was no hatred either. Only honest determination and a kind of courage Vincent had rarely encountered, even among his armed men. Victoria climbed to her feet with the help of another woman and immediately began to scream. She demanded that Rose be dismissed at once. She wanted the maid thrown out of Fortune Ranch without her wages, without food, and without any of her belongings. She also demanded that Rose be punished for humiliating her. The guests began whispering among themselves. Some were horrified. Others could barely hide their curiosity as they waited to see how the feared Vincent Marshall would respond. Rose did not lower her eyes. In a calm voice, she explained everything that had happened. She told Vincent that Victoria had intentionally hurt an innocent child, thrown him to the ground, and ordered the guards to beat him simply because he had approached a table. "You may fire me," Rose said. "You may throw me off this land tonight. But I will never regret defending someone who could not defend himself." Vincent looked at Tommy. The boy was still trembling. When Vincent approached him, he clearly saw the red finger marks Victoria had left around the child's arm. Something changed in the landowner's face. His features hardened, but his anger was not directed toward Rose. It was directed toward the woman he had promised to marry. Vincent called two of his men and ordered them to return Tommy safely to his family. He also commanded them to bring the family food, clothing, and enough money to support the child for several months. Then he turned toward Victoria. She expected him to defend her. Instead, Vincent looked at her with a coldness she had never seen before. "A man like me built his power through respect and carefully controlled fear," he said. "But I will never tolerate pointless cruelty, especially when it is directed at the weak simply for entertainment." Victoria's face turned pale. Vincent reminded her that their engagement had never been born from love. It was a convenient agreement between two powerful families, an alliance designed to strengthen business interests and territorial control. But no agreement, no matter how profitable, could justify such behavior beneath his roof. In front of every guest, Vincent Marshall ended his engagement to Victoria Cross. That same night, he ordered his men to prepare her carriage and remove all her belongings from the mansion. "You will leave Fortune Ranch before sunrise," he said coldly, "and you will never set foot on my land again." Victoria stood frozen, unable to accept what she had just heard. She had arrived in Red Rock believing she would soon become the most powerful woman in the region. Now she was being cast out in front of businessmen, landowners, and influential families because of a maid she had always considered beneath her. The news spread through the town like fire racing across dry grass. Within days, everyone was talking about the servant who had knocked down the fiancé of the most feared man in Red Rock with a single punch. They also spoke of how that act of courage had destroyed an engagement everyone believed could never be broken. Rose was certain that she would still lose her job. Even after Victoria's departure, she feared that Vincent would punish her once the attention of his guests had faded. She packed her few belongings and prepared for the worst. But Vincent did not dismiss her. Instead, he began seeking her company with a frequency that surprised everyone at the estate. At first, their conversations were brief. Vincent asked her about the workers, the families in the town, and the living conditions of those near the mines. Rose answered honestly, never trying to please him or tell him only what he wanted to hear. Over time, their conversations became longer. The relationship between them slowly began to bloom, like a desert flower opening only after years of waiting for rain. Vincent found in Rose a kind of honesty he had never encountered in the circles of wealth and power. She was not afraid of him. She did not flatter him in exchange for favors. She spoke with a directness that initially unsettled him but soon became more valuable to him than any treasure in his empire. Rose, in turn, discovered the man hidden behind the image of the ruthless landowner. She saw someone exhausted by the loneliness that came with power. A man surrounded by partners, employees, and armed guards, yet unable to trust any of them completely. Vincent longed for something sincere, something untouched by business, threats, or carefully negotiated marriages. The months that followed were not easy. Vincent's rivals learned that he had ended his engagement with an influential family after defending a simple maid. They considered his decision a sign of weakness and saw an opportunity to destroy his position. They began spreading doubt among his business partners. They claimed Vincent had lost his judgment. They questioned his ability to make rational decisions and threatened to withdraw their investments from the mines and railroad projects. Some even suggested that a man controlled by emotion was no longer fit to govern such a dangerous territory. But Vincent refused to surrender. He defended his decision with the same strength and determination he had used to build his empire. He proved that his power did not depend on arranged marriages or influential family names, but on his own intelligence, resources, and principles. Meanwhile, Victoria was unwilling to accept defeat. After returning to Red Rock, she began weaving a web of rumors, bribes, and conspiracies to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. She hired men to watch Fortune Ranch. She bribed former employees for information, and tried to convince Vincent's business partners that Rose was nothing more than a fortune hunter. According to Victoria, the maid had deliberately provoked the incident at the celebration, so she could present herself as a hero and win the owner's affection. But every lie collided with Rose's reputation. All of Red Rock knew about her generosity. The merchants knew she had never stolen a single coin. Poor families remembered the time she had shared her own food with their children. The workers of Fortune Ranch could testify to her honesty and the respect she showed everyone around her. Victoria soon understood that rumors would not be enough, so she made a far more dangerous decision. Desperate to regain her former position, she hired a group of armed men to kidnap Rose. Her plan was to use the young woman as leverage and force Vincent to return Victoria to her place at Fortune Ranch. However, the plan was discovered before it could be fully carried out. One of the former workers Victoria had attempted to bribe decided to inform Vincent. Although the man desperately needed money, he was unwilling to allow anyone to harm Rose. The ranch workers had grown deeply fond of the young woman because she had always treated them as equals. When Vincent learned of the conspiracy, he was consumed by a fury few people had ever witnessed. He gathered his men and mounted his horse with only one thought in his mind. He would protect the woman who had become the center of his world. The confrontation took place on the outskirts of Red Rock, among the enormous red stone formations that had given the region its name. Victoria's mercenaries attempted to intercept the carriage carrying Rose, but Vincent's men were already waiting for them. The battle was brief but violent. Gunshots echoed between the rocks, Horses reared in panic, and a thick cloud of dust covered the road. The mercenaries fought for money. The men of Fortune Ranch fought to protect a woman who had earned their loyalty and respect. That difference decided the outcome. The kidnappers were defeated and captured. Several of them confessed who had hired them and handed over letters signed by Victoria, along with documents proving that she had paid them. Faced with such overwhelming evidence, the local authorities could no longer look the other way. Victoria Cross was arrested and placed on trial for conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, and hiring armed criminals. Her family name and powerful connections were no longer enough to protect her. When the danger was finally gone, Vincent and Rose were able to breathe peacefully for the first time in many months. The man known for his merciless behavior began revealing a side of himself that surprised all of Red Rock. The side of a man deeply in love. Vincent walked beside Rose through the streets of the town without caring about stares or whispered gossip. He accompanied her when she visited the workers' families and listened carefully to her ideas for improving conditions at the mines and the ranch. Little by little, people stopped seeing Rose as a maid who had simply been fortunate. They began to see her as the only person brave enough to tell the most powerful man in the region the truth. Some time later, Vincent organized another celebration at Fortune Ranch. This time, however, he did not invite investors to finalize a business agreement. He did not fill the tables with expensive decorations to impress wealthy families. The celebration was prepared to thank the workers who had remained loyal throughout the crisis. There was no solemn violin music and no arrogant business speeches. Under a sky filled with stars, musicians from the town played guitars while the ranch workers, their families, and the village children all shared the same tables. Tommy Reed was there as well. The boy was healthy, well-dressed, and standing beside his grateful parents. In the middle of the celebration, Vincent approached Rose. The conversation slowly faded when everyone noticed the small box in his hands. Vincent Marshall, the man who had never knelt before anyone, lowered himself onto one knee in front of Rose Walker. The entire gathering fell silent. He opened the box and revealed a simple ring. "The punch you threw that night did more than protect an innocent child," Vincent said. "It awakened a part of me I believed had been lost forever. You forced me to remember that power means nothing when it is used to ignore injustice." Rose's eyes filled with tears. Vincent continued, "I am not asking you to become my wife for convenience. I do not need another alliance, a powerful family name, or a fortune. I am asking because I cannot imagine my future without your honesty, your courage, and your noble heart beside me." With tears running down her cheeks, Rose accepted. She understood that her life had changed forever from the moment she chose not to remain silent in the face of cruelty. Several weeks later, the entire town of Red Rock celebrated their wedding. It was a simple ceremony, but it was filled with warmth and genuine happiness. It had none of the extravagance and exaggerated luxury Victoria would have demanded. Instead of arrogant businessmen and families motivated by personal gain, the guests included the workers of Fortune Ranch, local merchants, miners, struggling families, and children from the town. People who had once been too afraid to raise their eyes in Vincent's presence now approached him freely to offer their congratulations. Everyone witnessed how true love had triumphed over ambition, fear, and cruelty. As the years passed, Rose became far more than Vincent's wife. She became his closest advisor. She brought compassion into the decisions made at the ranch and convinced Vincent to raise wages, improve safety in the mines, and build a school for the workers' children. She also organized a community kitchen for families facing difficult times. Under Rose's influence, Fortune Ranch stopped being only a symbol of power and fear. It became a place of justice, opportunity, and hope for the people who worked there. Vincent remained a strong and commanding man. His enemies still feared him, and his partners continued to respect his authority. But he no longer ruled only through intimidation. He had learned that an empire supported by loyalty could be far stronger than one built entirely on threats. For many years, the story of the feared owner of Fortune Ranch was passed down from one generation to the next. Yet his name was never mentioned without also remembering the brave Maid, who had stood against injustice when everyone else had chosen silence. With a single punch, Rose Walker changed the destiny of an estate, a town, and a powerful man. And her story proved that neither money, fear, nor authority can destroy the dignity of a person courageous enough to stand in defense of the truth.